Hello, everybody. I want to have a mystical conversation with all of you, the kind where we lift above our pain and our tragedies and lose ourselves in the wonders of divine mysteries, share dreams from the other side, intuitive nudgings, and soul mission yearnings. A mystical conversation is what happens when we lift above the ego mind and the human story, and we look at our lives from that place of divine inspiration. Hi, I'm Sue Frederick. I'm the author of 8 books. I've been fascinated with the divine inspiration view of life since my own husband crossed in 1980. And I've written several books, including Bridges to Heaven, True Stories of Loved Ones on the Other Side, I See Your Dream Job, and Through a Divine Lens. I'm a lifelong intuitive, master numerologist, ordained unity minister, and soul regression therapist. I've helped thousands of clients find their way through this dense realm that we call life. My website is SueFrederick.com. I'm so excited about our guest today. You all are going to love her so much. Her name is LeAnn Hull, and I'm holding up her book. It's called How to Live When You Want to Die, and anyone who has grieved knows exactly what she means about that. So let me tell you about the amazing LeAnn. She and her beautiful husband, Clay, were married in 1980 and raised 4 children. They ran a construction company together and worked together. And as LeAnn got involved in the business community, she realized she had great leadership skills and speaking skills. She ran for a seat in the United States Congress in 2010 and loved doing campaign speeches and debates, but she didn't quite know yet what her true work was meant to be here. And then in 2012, she experienced the tragic loss of her 16-year-old son, Andy, to suicide. LeAnn founded a nonprofit organization called Andy Hull's Sunshine Foundation. The mission of the group is to raise awareness of the high rate of suicide while providing coping skills to deal with life's challenges. The motto or the theme is You Matter, and she offers this support and encouragement to so many children and people everywhere in the world. I have to tell you personally, the first moment I met LeAnn, she lives here in Phoenix with me and with all the Helping Parents Heal moms. I met her at my first meeting of Helping Parents Heal moms, and LeAnn stood out like an extraordinary, powerful light. And our first conversation, I just have to share it with the listeners before I let you speak, LeAnn, because it made such an impression on me. And it's when I fell in love with you. And what she said is she got out of her car and walked over to me, and I was walking with Elizabeth Boisson, the founder of Helping Parents Heal. We were going into a meeting of all grieving moms that are so amazing here, this group. And LeAnn walked up and said, "Oh, do you have a child in spirit too, Sue?" And I said, "No, not a child. I think my soul knew I wasn't strong enough for that." And LeAnn said, "Good answer." And I instantly loved her. Say hello, LeAnn.
Hi, Sue. I'm so glad to be here. What an awesome time to be able to spend with you and the listeners.
And something I didn't mention in your bio that I want to bring up to emphasize your amazing strength is that your beloved's husband, Clay, who, you write about in the book, helping you get through the loss of Andy, your beloved husband, Clay, died suddenly and unexpectedly 2 years ago. And now you have 2 beloveds in spirit, your beautiful son and your beautiful husband. So if you don't mind, do you want to share some of the first mystical experiences you had of knowing they were still with you?
Yes, I would. I just am so excited to be able to share these because I never thought this was possible. because I came, which is interesting because I came from a Christian background. I was an evangelical Christian. So, of course, I knew about heaven, but that's different. That knowledge is different than this. And when Andy passed after suicide, for me, knowing about heaven was never going to be enough. I wanted to know specifics. What's my kid doing in heaven? What's life like for him there? Because I absolutely knew there had to be more than that. And it wasn't him sitting there playing a harp on some cloud. My kid was a lot, just an amazing, full of life kid.
He
So
was a
he
baseball star, wasn't
he
he?
was a baseball star.
Mhm.
So I had some people message me privately, weirdly, and they said, "You need to go see a medium in Carefree." And I thought, well, only if I'm going to go to hell am I going to see a medium, but that yearning and that longing, like you said, my soul must have known. My soul wanted more. And so I went in secret. I didn't tell anybody. But without a doubt, and this was a month after Andy had passed, after having that conversation with my son for an hour, which blew my mind, the last thing he said to me in that conversation was, "My mom's tough as nails and she's going to be fine." And I walked out of there and I knew that I would live every moment of the rest of my life to prove that kid right.
And
And
you
that
know,
has
one of the
been
things I just read in your book that blew my mind, I didn't remember it before, is that during that first reading with the medium who knew nothing about your story, she gave you information that really helped you put the pieces of the puzzle together about how and why Andy crossed. And you don't have to share that, but I thought the fact that she gave those details to you was so beautiful because only Andy could have been giving her that information in spirit.
absolutely, because for me, that why question, I mean, that haunts all of parents who are newly bereaved, or really that why question just in general in life. Why do things happen to us? It doesn't have to be the loss of a child. It can just be, any number of things. And what I knew is that why question for this purpose served no purpose. And so I never asked that why question. But that information that was given to me at that reading gave me specifics about why he passed. And it didn't mean that it was ever going to fix that broken heart per se or solve that gut ache, but it helped me to understand a little bit better of the possibilities of what happens, and took me on so that my messaging could be broader and reach more people because of what had happened to him. That was super important, to be able to reach so many more people.
Yeah. And, I know that your work today, you do go out and give talks, especially to kids and schools, correct?
Yes,
And
but now it's moved into adults, which I
um,
really love, the adult audience.
I was wondering, what do the kids come up and ask you about or talk to you about? Because you're reaching this part of our population that, just like you said in your bio, is really struggling with an epidemic of kids choosing to leave early, as we say in our spiritual way of putting it. What are your thoughts and feelings about that? And what do they talk to you about that?
I think the most important thing about that is their willingness to talk to me, with me, is because of my vulnerability and my approach to suicide or loss, grief, whatever it is, that it's not, I don't talk about it in terms of fear, sadness, trepidation, stigma, shame. I really owned that journey from the very beginning, because it didn't matter how my child had crossed. He could have crossed by cancer or a car accident. None of that was relevant, because he wasn't here, he was there. He was in the spiritual sense. So by not being afraid to say that my kid died by suicide, it allowed that conversation to be open. They knew that if I could talk about it, then they could. And then they felt comfortable saying, this is what I felt, this is what I've thought. And inevitably, after giving my presentations, I mean, I had one that I gave to 900 men on a construction site. And I got a message from one of the men afterwards, and he said, I was planning on ending my life tonight. And I want you to know that you have saved my life. I reached out and got help after your presentation.
Wow.
So those are some pretty powerful experiences
No
for me.
kidding. And I just got to say to my numerology people, I just want to say LeAnn is the perfect example of an 8-path soul. And any of you who are my numerology students and clients, you know what 8 is. It's a number of power, of owning your power first. And I'm sure LeAnn's background, if you knew her whole childhood, you'd say, wow, she found a way to be powerful as a woman in this world, and even ran for Congress and ran a construction company. I mean, that's power right there. And then when her son crossed by suicide, she had the power to say, this is what happened, this is the truth of it, and let me help the rest of you cope with things like this. All of that is an example of power used in the correct way. She's also got the Cancer energy, Cancer 8, which means LeAnn is super sensitive. And as her friend, I can tell you, I've seen her vulnerable, sweet, sensitive side, and we've shared and connected there. And yet when she goes out to talk and inspire people, whether it's kids or adults, there is nothing like her. She's a rock star. And it's that total owning of her power. And the other thing I wanted to say is this year for you, LeAnn, you'll get a kick out of this. 2023 in numerology for you is an 8 personal year. So it's going to be a rock star year for you. Your whole path is about owning your power and empowering others. And this year, this is the year like you get to speak in Washington, D.C. or something. It's a big, powerful year for you. So I can't wait to see what happens.
Me too. And I do sense that. I feel that. I felt really ready to say, I'm ready and I want more. That's a big statement for
It
people
is.
that have that are grieving or newly bereaved or whatever you go through, to be able to say, I want more and not have to be fearful about it. When you talk about powerful, I was not always so graceful about it. And still I have my moments of challenge with that, because I have always felt that since a little girl. I wanted to be in charge. And that's what I understood. I misinterpreted power for being in charge.
Right.
And owning the journey, that's a positive way of it. But the being in charge, sometimes I would step on people in that process to make sure that they understood I was in charge. But
But
that
LeAnn,
also
that's
allowed
exactly
me.
perfect. That's perfect because that's every 8-path soul I've ever known or talked to or worked with. You have to step on both sides of that power thing, giving it away sometimes and then overusing it so that you arrive at the perfect understanding of it. That's what you've done. That's where you are.
Yeah, because I don't feel like I have to prove it so much. I felt like I had to prove it all of my life, especially being a woman in the construction industry. It was so, so difficult.
And being
And
blonde and beautiful.
uh, I mean, that was my nickname, unfortunately. These guys on these big job sites, hey, Blondie,
Right,
I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much more to me than that.
right.
But that was the deal.
So I was wondering if you could share a little bit also about the loss of your husband, Clay, and how any mystical experiences with him that you would like to share.
My journey with Clay was just such a full journey, probably because I met him so young. So I had a lot of growing, lot to go through, raising children, running a business. But weirdly enough, we had the best 10 years of our marriage after Andy passed. And that's an unusual experience for so many people that go through trauma and grief. But we knew that we had always said our marriage was a decision and not an emotion. And so that was a conscious decision, and to allow each other to process that loss totally different without being threatened.
Right.
So Clay passed, weirdly enough, on the night of our 40th anniversary. The
Oh
day
my
before,
God.
we bought property. We bought 8 acres to build our retirement home on. And Clay had been walking the property. He was so excited about where he was going to build our house and what he was going to do. So it was a wonderful day. And then Saturday, the next day, we celebrated with the kids, went out to dinner. And then I had surprised him with this compilation of songs that I'd put together that reflected our whole marriage together, our whole life together. And we danced around the fireplace, the fire pit outside, and my oldest son videotaped it.
Wow.
And at the beginning of the videotape, when it was getting ready to start, I didn't say something like a normal person would. I didn't say, hey, happy anniversary, babe, 40 years. I said, I have loved you from before. I love you now, and I'll love you then. And even as I was saying it, I thought, oh my gosh, where'd that come from? But we went on, danced, videotaped it. It went to sleep in the middle of the night. I heard a loud yell, ah! And I reached over to see if he was in bed, and he wasn't. And so I got up, walked around the corner to the bathroom, and I saw him standing there.
Oh,
And I said, are you okay? And he said, I'm fine. Okay, I went back to bed, got up the next morning and walked out to the living room. He was sitting on a chair with his feet up on the coffee table, his arms on the arm, and he was just sitting there. And it was kind of dark. It was really early. So I walked on by, made my coffee, came back around, and he had passed, I could tell.
wow.
And so shocking, of course. And that afternoon, a friend medium, the same medium that I went to see with Andy, she called me and she said, LeAnn, your people want to talk to you. Can I give you a reading on Wednesday? Because this was Sunday. And I said, oh, heck yes. So Sunday, she says, the first thing is Clay is showing me is he's standing here with a bullhorn. And she says, he's going, ah. She said, he yelled as loud as he could to wake you up to say goodbye. That
Wow.
was his apparition I saw in the bathroom. He had already passed.
Are you serious?
So I
Oh my
reflected on
God.
that and I go, I don't really remember audibly hearing him saying, I'm fine, but I knew he said, I'm fine. And I was just like, wow,
So
that
you
was
actually had a
amazing.
dream vision while he was dying,
I
that
guess
he
so.
stood in front of you and said, I'm fine.
I know I got up too. I'm really sure I did more than just dream. I know I got up and walked into that bathroom and saw him.
Wow. Well done, Clay, because
Okay.
that made your parting better, to know that you had had an interaction where he had said, I'm fine, even after he was out of his body.
Yes. Little jealous, of course, that he was there now with Andy and my mom. So, I got a lot of family over there right now. Just going to do my best to make sure that they're super proud of me here.
Oh, I have no doubt of that. But you bring up a really good topic here. One of the things you write about in this incredible book, How to Live When You Want to Die, is that you, even when Andy crossed, you battled a little bit of that urge to cross over yourself, to be with him. Would you like to talk about that and how you got through that?
Yes, that the title of my book is pretty shocking for most people because it's so real. Most people, I would say, not even just losing a child, but a lot of people going through their life have moments when they think, man, I just really don't want to be here on the planet.
Of
It's just
course.
really tough. It's hard. And so I wanted people to understand that is how I felt. That is how things I thought about. But then to differentiate between feelings and decisions, just like we did with our marriage, and that I could have these feelings over here. And I recognized, and it was empowering to actually be able to look at it and go, okay, I have this opportunity. I can do this if I choose. And I'm going to take this bridge across to the other side using the coping skills that I had and were continuing to gain to make a different decision, to look at what I was feeling over here from a decision point of view. Yes, this is real. This is how I feel. And this is how I'm going to respond to it. Because, of course, I like being in charge.
Right. Oh gosh, that's the good side of the eight path. Any of you eight path souls listening, take notes, because LeAnn has figured out the right use of power in every way. And what do you say, because now you're really a voice for moms whose children have taken their own life, which you're bringing that out of the darkness of stigma. That's so important. I mean, to this day, there are people who in their child's obituary, they won't say that their child took their own life because it's such a stigma. And I think you're bringing that into the light of healing and understanding. And what would you say to a mom or a dad who is still in that terrible, raw grief of their child taking their own life and feeling stigmatized by it? What words of empowerment do you have for them?
One of the biggest fears that you have as a newly bereaved parent is when someone asks you, how many children do you have? And what are your children doing, or whatever. And so again, by addressing it, instead of it's being that recipient, it's sitting there and waiting and anticipating those questions and not knowing what to do or how to respond. Maybe my run for Congress helped because we had to have our little elevator speech, so a preparation in advance. I did the same with that. So I anticipated the questions that would have scared me the most, and I prepared my answers. And my answers for a parent, we never want our children to be forgotten. That's our biggest, most important thing, is we don't want our children to be forgotten, and it's important how they're remembered. So again, I address it right at the beginning. I have 4 kids. My youngest son, Andy, died by suicide. I have 2 boys in the military, a daughter who's a nurse. And let me tell you about Andy, because he was so amazing, and I can only imagine the things he's doing in heaven now. And so that dispels, first of all, then the whoever I'm talking to understands that I'm not ashamed of how my child passed. I'm not ashamed for me or for him. I'm more focused on how my kid lived than how he passed. It is a non-issue how he passed. It's no different than some child who's died by suicide. It's a malfunction of the brain, same as a malfunction, anything by cancer. My daughter has diabetes. Her pancreas does not work. It's exactly the same thing.
Right.
It's a malfunction of our body, how it was created and designed to work.
The other thing I'd say about it spiritually is, from reading your book and from working with so many moms whose children have crossed early, I believe these are highly evolved souls, and they don't need to stay. They're coming in with a mission, a soul mission. And in your book, you even talk about when Andy was little, he would have these strange little things to say about his father in another life and all of that. Do you want to talk about that at all?
We were all riding in the car, and my husband was driving, and Andy was sitting in the back, and he was probably 3 or 4, my father, blah blah blah. And we were all looking at him like, dad's driving the car. And he's like, no, not that, my father, not dad, my father. And we're like, whatever, kid. I mean, it's so strange for us. And Clay also had those same types of experiences. Clay had started telling us that he had an Indian that followed him through life. And again, because we had no experience with this, we thought that was a little strange. And I remember one time in our house, and he said, my Indian's standing right out there next to the grill. And I
Wow.
looked, I'm like, yeah, no Indian there. But then right before he crossed, that year before he passed, he called me. He was working out of state. He called me one morning and he was crying. And he said, LeAnn, he said, my Indian showed up here last night and he's my guide. And he let me draw him. He sat here for 3 hours while I drew him, and he drew this unbelievable picture of his, and he titled it The Guide.
It blows my mind, LeAnn, because I don't know if you know this about my story with Paul, but when Paul was dying in 1980, his mother, Paul was part Cherokee, and his mother got us a meeting with an amazing Native American healer in North Dakota. At the time, his name was Chief Fool's Crow. He was well honored in the Sioux tradition as a healer. And Paul's mother actually had to make like hundreds of little bags of tobacco and send them to Chief Fool's Crow to get him to take a meeting. And we went, Paul and I drove up there, and Chief Fool's Crow did this amazing ceremony with us. And we were all in altered states from it. And I don't smoke or do drugs, but he definitely brought us into this altered state. And he then, took me for a walk and said, Paul chose you to, he's dying. He already made that choice before the lifetime began. And he chose you to walk the journey with him. So kind of buck up and let, be strong about this. And, and then when Paul died 3 weeks later, and every minute of those next 3 weeks, Chief Fool's Crow by spirit was in his dreams, was teaching him things. And when Paul died, Chief Fool's Crow still blows my mind. Paul died in the hospital. And after he had crossed, I got in the car and drove home to our apartment. I walked in, and this was 1980 when there were only landline phones and no internet. So there's no way Chief Fool's Crow could have known that Paul had crossed. And yet Chief Fool's Crow had hiked out to the town, the closest town, to get a phone on a phone, and had called his guy in Denver and said, call Sue, tell her I'm with Paul. I helped him cross, and that he'll visit her, but she can't hold on to him because he's very attached to her. So Chief Fool's Crow was our guide through the whole thing. And now he's in spirit, and he's one of my guides. And you're telling me that your beautiful husband, Clay, also had a Native American guide, spirit guide. That's amazing.
Well, and I'd love to share the picture with you, and maybe you can post it on your, when you, in conjunction with this podcast, because
Absolutely.
it's an amazingly beautiful picture. And my husband was not sick. My husband was not on any medication. He was just active and full life. I mean, he exited as quickly as Andy did. It was just boom, gone.
Wow.
The medium, she said that Clay said it was like when he left, it was like going through a turnstile at a subway station, that he was like going through and went, I'm going this way. And he just left. And I know, and looking back, he was telling me such strange things. That whole year, he was astro traveling. This is a man who did not believe in mediums or anything. And he tells me he's astro traveling,
That's
that
so
this
great.
year was preparing his soul to leave.
I love that story so much because, he was not a woo-woo guy. He was a construction guy. And didn't he also work like in the oil industry and everything?
Yes, in North Dakota.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, he was a man's man, a guy's
Yes,
guy. And here he
yes.
is having mystical experiences in the year before he crosses. And then even in his moment of crossing, waking you up in a dream and getting you to have a vision that would bring you comfort that he had said goodbye to you. I mean, I'm kind of in love with Clay hearing about all this.
We have had some encounters since he passed, not a lot, but I mean, I do talk to him every night, every morning. I go to bed, picturing or feeling or whatever it is, imagining him laying behind me with his arms wrapped around me. But we have, uh, we have had an intimate relation since he left. So
I'm going to
weirdly
share
enough,
what you're talking about because LeAnn and her husband have actually had astral intercourse, I guess you could call it.
yes, I mean, it's uncomfortable for me to even say, because how does that happen? How's that even possible? And I don't tell a lot of people that, and here I am
Here
broadcasting
you
it.
are. But I'm
It's
glad you
just,
are, because this is an experience that people do have when their partner crosses. And I've talked to several people who've lost a partner who say that partner comes back in a physical way. So again, we're taking the stigma out of it here. And I'll even say that with Paul, we were young, we were in our 20s, in the midst of that passionate love when he crossed. And the first night he crossed, I was in our bed, and it was definitely 2 a.m, because I started taking note of when these incidents would happen. And with Paul, they were always at 2 a.m. And I suddenly felt Paul's entire physical body. It was not a dream, LeAnn. I felt his legs around me. I felt he had this particular feeling in his legs. I would say, you have fuzzy legs. I love your fuzzy legs. Wrap your fuzzy legs around me. And that night I felt his fuzzy legs, and we were in bed and he was wrapped around me. And at first my thought was, oh, good, Paul's in bed, and then I kind of came to consciousness like, oh, wait, but he's crossed. And at that moment, a being of white, his guide, his hand moved across me and tapped Paul. And then Paul lifted up to go with spirit, because we were so young and so connected that it would have prevented Paul from really kind of moving on as he needed to. But then once he had moved on, he's been able to come back in different ways for me. But for you, you were with Clay for 40 years, and he had a long, successful life. So he was more at peace, if I'm right, with
Yes.
the idea of leaving this earthly life.
Oh, for sure. And we have I don't know whether it's appropriate standing joke in the family, but, Clay and I had continued, we held hands, we were very affectionate with each other. And that day of our anniversary, we had relations and intimate. And so my daughter's always like, Mom, you killed Dad. I'm like, well, he went happy. Let me just tell you that.
Oh, that's so great. That is so wonderful. And, anybody who's lost a partner, it's so good to be able to talk about it with this lightness, and humor. And I remember when Paul crossed, it was really humor that helped me get through some of my darkest days, and I had girlfriends who would just come over and say, my God, if Paul could see you now wearing those pajamas for 5 days without a shower, he would be disgusted. And
Right.
those kind of conversations are what kind of got me going,
Yep.
Oh, baby girl. So what would you say to let's talk about widowhood now, because that is a different loss. What would you say to someone who is now alone, perhaps for the first time in their life? Their partner has crossed, they're having some mystical connections, but they're still thinking, what am I going to do by myself here? How is it worth continuing? What would you say to them?
That's the last statement that is the most important. So the first one, the widowhood, I hate that word to begin with. And secondly, I'm still navigating it. It's only been 2 years, so I am new at that. But that is it worth it? So I always have had the ability to have a perspective at looking at others. And so if we value life, if we valued our partner's life, if we value our child's life, if that's important enough, if you switched places and you were on the other side and they were here, how would you want them to be living? Would you want them to just be sad and mourning? Or would you be able to look at it from a different perspective and go, man, you've only got this limited time there. Grab all you can get, And I've always wanted that. I wanted to grab everything I could. So in those, I am still wandering around trying to figure out where I'm going, what I'm doing. I struggle with some of those typical things, my identity. I've always been a couple all my life.
Yeah.
So, but it's separate from, is there still value here? Without a doubt, there's still value here. And I know that. And it's the adventure. And if you look at that way, the adventure of finding out what this new value is, this new journey. It's not the end. It is a new chapter, not the end of the book. It's a new chapter. It's uncomfortable. It's challenging. It's different. But you're not the only one who has faced it in this life. And I like to think that I'm a pioneer woman. If they could do it, you bet I can.
Boy, that's the truth. If we were on a wagon train and you were leading us across the country, I'd feel very comfortable and safe.
I am in my element that way.
But, another thing I always like to say to people who've lost a partner is, and even if you've lost a child, your monkey mind, your human mind will say, oh, life is going to be terrible from here on out. And especially if you're single now, and you don't want to date or any of that stuff, your mind will go, oh my gosh, you're going to be lonely. You're going to be left out of all the social things. And yet I say to those people, you have no idea how divine order works. There is a spirit, God-loving consciousness orchestrating this whole game here that we're playing. And there is so much magic around the corner. All you have to do is keep your heart open, keep trying. It doesn't matter if you spend a week in bed, as long as on that 7th day you decide to get out of bed and go give it a try. Maybe just go to a coffee shop or something. That's when the universe goes, yay, you're still giving it a chance. Let's bring you some magic. Let's open some doors. And life is the greatest adventure, no matter what happens to us, when we open our heart to the lesson, the learning, and keep trying, keep looking up for that meaning.
For our society, I think we lack patience, and we are such an instant gratification society. Having owned a business, and we followed a lot of motivational people like Zig Ziglar and
Mhm.
Charles Stanley and Schuler and all kinds of people, that those things were ingrained in our minds about training the mind and the mental process. So in a sense, COVID, if you want to say prepared, helped us, if you can look at it that way. It helped us to learn to sit in silence,
Yes.
to re-navigate, to look around. What can I do that's different? Instead of the constant interaction, barragement of fixes that we get from activities, we had to be more resourceful. That's the same thing that I found after each instance of loss in my life, and more so even, I would say that the loss of my husband was more difficult than the loss of my son. And so I'm having to be comfortable spending some quiet time and not being stimulated, not being filled all the time while I allow the input to come in. So I want to say this, you have to book the trip before you have the experience. So
Mm.
you have to begin to visualize, manifest, dream again, hope again. And it may not happen right away. You have to be comfortable with it not happening, just like going to the gym. If we could all walk into the gym and walk out a different person, wouldn't that be marvelous? But this process is no different than going to the gym. You have to put in the work. You have to be patient with the process. You have to be persistent.
Yeah.
So those are really important things through each time of challenge, loss, grief, to allow yourself to be patient
Yeah.
and quiet.
Well, I think that is so true. And that's actually exactly how I look at COVID. I look at COVID as the big sit down and be quiet message from the universe, that we, especially with social media, we've gotten so outwardly focused, And I think our human consciousness was really at a turning place of, are we going to start remembering that we're divine beings here and acting like it, or are we going to keep being crazy and lost here? And so COVID told everyone to go home, shut up, be quiet, meditate, pray, whatever words you want to put to it, and reevaluate your life. And I know for me, it made a lot of things a lot more clear to me about what was important to me and important in my work with clients and moving forward. And I've talked to so many people who feel that way too. And people lost their jobs, but those were often jobs that had not served them for a long time and they needed to reinvent. And I mean, I wrote a book called I See Your Dream Job, about how we're always meant to kind of reinvent our life and our work. And grief is the ultimate reinvention process, because just like after your beautiful son crossed, and then again after your husband crossed, there's a personal reinvention and a spiritual reinvention required, because life is growth and change and evolution.
Yeah, I'm not anything like I was 10 years ago. My core personality is the same, so that take charge kind of person, but the evolution is it is mind blowing. I can see it in myself. It makes me want to cry. I'm so proud of that. I really am. I've worked really hard to get to
Yeah,
where I'm at here. I was talking to my son and I was encouraging him to write because writing is a tool for me. It is I don't necessarily hear spirit or see a lot of signs. For me, it comes as a download
through
through my
writing.
writing.
Me
And
too.
and he said, "Well, mom," he said, I don't feel inspired like you get inspired." And I said, "No, it's just like I said, book the trip. I sit down to write and then I wait
Yes,
and then it drops through me.
I
And what comes
totally
out of
agree.
me, I think what I know what I'm going to write about. And then when I finish writing, I'm like, oh, I guess I got to change the title because that's not at all what just
I
came down.
love that, LeAnn, because that's exactly how writing has always been for me. And it's been my greatest healing tool.
For me too. Yeah.
And, before every single client that I have, the gift for me is that before the session begins, I tune into that client's soul mission and they're departed, and I pick up the pen and I don't know what's going to come through. And I just start letting it go. And the writing is the voice of spirit for me. I'm not one of those mediums where I can stand up in front of a room of 200 people and go, oh, your son says this. But if you let me sit and write for a few minutes, I'm going to give you pages of words from your departed. So any of you people out there who want to connect with your beloved spirit, your beloved in spirit, pick up the pen and give that a try. And if nothing else, connect to your own spirit guide for help and say, I'm having a really hard time here. I don't understand the point of my life anymore. What do you have to say to me, God or spirit? And start writing. You would be amazed the wisdom that comes through.
And I get woken up, not that often because everybody knows that I don't like to be woken up. Apparently even spirit knows that, but I do get woken up and these thoughts, just sentences will pop in my head and I'm like, ugh, so I turn over, grab my phone, write it in my notes and then go back to sleep because I know that that's a message that's important and they all
Yeah.
have been important things for me to hear when I am woken up in the middle of the night. So
Yeah.
I like that.
One more story I'll share and then I'll let everybody go. But back when I was becoming a writer, right after Paul died, I was, deciding that I would seriously go back to school to be a writer, journalism school, creative writing school at University of Colorado. And I had never been a published writer before. And Paul gave me my first story in spirit. It was after he had crossed. I was sound asleep, and in the middle of the night, I woke up with this whole first paragraph of a story coming through my head. And I had to sit up in bed, turn on the light, and I wrote the entire 500-word piece, like in 20 minutes at the most. And I know Paul was giving it to me because it was the first story that I sent out and got published in a magazine, and it got my writing career going. And I still thank Paul to this day because it wasn't one of those sitting at the typewriter trying to make it happen or see how old I am. It was the typewriter back then. Instead, it was just waking up in the middle of the night, receiving it, and then forcing
Yes.
myself to get up and write it down. And that's the key to all of you listeners is you got to take the note, get up, write when it's coming through you, sit down and let it flow no matter what time it is. So, and how do listeners find you for more of this beautiful inspiration, LeAnn?
Well, they can find me on Facebook. LeAnn Hull is easy to find. I have a lot of followers. I love it. I do a lot of videos. They can find information about our foundation on the website, which is andyssunshine.com. So it's Andy Hull Sunshine, but the website is andyssunshine.com. And then you can find my book on Amazon at How to Live When You Want to Die.
And you can invite LeAnn to speak to your group. She's an awesome speaker, as you can tell from this interview. She will inspire people, knock their socks off. So let's let your light shine even brighter, get your word out to even more people this 8 personal year for you, Miss Beautiful LeAnn. And I'm Sue Frederick. My website is suefrederick.com, and it has been an absolute joy connecting to you, LeAnn.
Thank you, Sue. I appreciate it. Love
Thank
you.
you so much. Love you too. Bye-bye, everybody.